Welcome, fellow historians and mystery seekers, to Sleepy Hollow Uncovered. In the heart of American folklore, there gallops a terrifying specter, a headless rider on a powerful black steed, forever searching for his lost head. He is the stuff of nightmares, a legend whispered around campfires for 200 years. But what if I told you that this quintessentially American ghost was not born in the misty hollows of New York, but conceived in the smoky industrial heart of England, and that the horseman himself rode out of the pages of an old German folk tale? Today, we embark on a journey to uncover the true, surprising story behind one of the greatest tales ever told, Washington Irving's The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. We will explore the man behind the myth, the real history that shaped his world, and the literary blueprint he used to create an immortal American monster. And now our story begins not in a haunted glen, but with the man who imagined it all, a man who at his lowest point would create his highest art. Chapter 1. The Father of American Literature. To understand the legend, we must first understand the man. Washington Irving was born in 1783 in the heart of New York City, just as the last British ships were sailing out of the harbor, officially ending the Revolutionary War. He was, quite literally, a child of the new republic. His very name was a tribute to the nation's hero. His mother, upon meeting General George Washington, declared, "Here is a bairn named after you." Irving grew up in a young, boisterous, and insecure nation. America had won its political independence, but its cultural identity was still in its infancy. In the world of arts and letters, America was seen as a crude backwater, a place of commerce and farming, not of sophisticated literature. The great poets, novelists, and thinkers were all English. To be a writer in America was to be seen as a second-class citizen in the global republic of letters. This sense of cultural insecurity would become a driving force in Irving's life. He was not a natural scholar, the youngest of 11 children. He was a dreamy, romantic boy who preferred exploring the sleepy Dutch villages up the Hudson River to sitting in a stuffy classroom. He trained as a lawyer, but had little passion for it. His true love was writing. As a young man, he found early fame under the pseudonym Diedrich Knickerbocker, publishing the satirical A History of New York, a comic masterpiece that playfully mythologized the state's Dutch past. It made him a local celebrity, a charming man about town known for his wit and affable nature. He fell deeply in love with a young woman named Matilda Hoffman, the daughter of a prominent judge. His future seemed bright and full of promise, and then his world fell apart. In 1809, at the age of just 17, Matilda died suddenly of consumption. Irving was devastated. He never fully recovered from the loss, and would never marry. The grief cast a long melancholic shadow over his life. For years he struggled to find his purpose, his youthful exuberance replaced by a quiet, deep-seated sorrow. He tried to find a new path in his family's international trade business, a decision that would lead him across the Atlantic. But this, too, would end in disaster, pushing him to the brink of ruin and, paradoxically, forcing him to create the work that would make him immortal. The stage for The Legend of Sleepy Hollow was set not by success, but by profound failure, grief, and exile. In 1815, Washington Irving sailed for England. He was not traveling as a tourist or literary ambassador, but as a reluctant businessman. The Irving family's hardware importing firm, a transatlantic enterprise run by his brothers, was in serious trouble. The recent War of 1812 had crippled trade, and the business was teetering on the edge of collapse. Irving went to Liverpool, hoping to help salvage the family fortune. He failed. For 2 years, he and his brother Peter struggled against mounting debts and a changing economic landscape. The experience was a miserable one for Irving. He was a man of letters, not ledgers, a dreamer, not a merchant. He found the world of commerce to be a source of toil and trouble, care and vexation. He felt trapped, his literary ambitions gathering dust while he wrestled with endless rows of figures. In 1818, the inevitable happened. The family firm declared bankruptcy. The news was a crushing blow. At the age of 35, Washington Irving was financially ruined, professionally adrift, and stranded in a foreign country. He described himself as a man cast down and out, and my spirits trampled in the dust. The charming celebrity of New York was now an unemployed expatriate, facing a future of profound uncertainty. It was the lowest point of his life. He retreated from the bustling port of Liverpool to the home of his sister Sarah and her husband Henry Van Wart in Birmingham. At the time, Birmingham was the roaring heart of England's industrial revolution. It was a city of factories and foundries, its skies darkened by the smoke of 1,000 chimneys. For Irving, a man who romanticized the past and the pastoral, it must have felt like a kind of hell. Yet it was here, in this smoky industrial city, surrounded by the wreckage of his financial life, that he made a desperate, career-defining decision. He had tried to be a businessman and had failed. He would not try again. His only remaining path, his only hope for salvation, was the one thing he had always loved, his pen. He resolved to make his living solely as a writer. This was a radical, almost reckless decision. At the time, very few authors, even in England, could support themselves entirely through their writing. For an American, whose work was often pirated without payment, it was nearly unheard of. But for Irving, it was an act of both desperation and liberation. He wrote to a friend, "I am now as it were at the end of my fortune. I must turn my talents, such as they are, to account." He began to write with a new urgency, pouring his anxiety, his nostalgia, and his genius onto the page. He was physically in England, but his mind had drifted back across the Atlantic. He was surrounded by the noise of the new industrial age, but his imagination sought refuge in the quiet, dreamy, pre-industrial world of his youth, the sleepy Dutch villages along the Hudson River. It was a profound and powerful nostalgia, a longing for a home he couldn't return to. He began to sketch out stories and essays that blended his observations of English life with romanticized memories of American landscapes and folklore. He would create a literary persona, a gentleman traveler named Geoffrey Crayon, who could act as his guide through these collected works. This collection, born from failure and exile, would be called the Sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon, Gent, and hidden within its pages were 2 stories drawn from the deepest well of his memory, 2 tales that would not only save his career, but would give a new nation its own enduring mythology. Faced with ruin, Washington Irving knew he had to write, but he couldn't simply write as himself. The raw, personal desperation of his situation was not the stuff of romantic literature. He needed a mask, a literary disguise that would allow him to step outside his own anxieties and observe the world with a charming, melancholic grace. He needed a narrator who could bridge the gap between his American memories and his English reality, and so he created one of the most successful pseudonyms in literary history, Geoffrey Crayon, Gent. The name itself was a stroke of genius. Geoffrey was a classic, almost archaic English name, evoking the father of English poetry, Geoffrey Chaucer. It immediately gave his persona a sense of old-world legitimacy and literary tradition. The surname, Crayon, was just as clever. It suggested an artist, but a humble one. A crayon is a tool for sketching, for capturing fleeting impressions, not for creating grand finished oil paintings. This name told the reader exactly what to expect, not a weighty philosophical tome, but a collection of light, observant, and picturesque vignettes. He was Geoffrey Crayon, gentleman, a man of leisure, a curious traveler, a romantic soul. Through the eyes of Geoffrey Crayon, Irving could process his world. Crayon was a perpetual tourist, an amiable American wandering through England, captivated by its ancient traditions, crumbling ruins, and quaint customs. This persona was the perfect passport. It allowed Irving to write about England with a foreigner's sense of wonder, which was flattering to his English readers. At the same time, Crayon's gentle nostalgia for his distant American homeland allowed Irving to explore the themes of memory and displacement that were so close to his own heart. The project that Crayon would author was just as brilliantly conceived. It was not a single novel, which was a risky and demanding form. Instead, it was a collection, a miscellany of short pieces, titled The Sketch Book. This format was a delicate balancing act, designed for maximum appeal on both sides of the Atlantic. For his English audience, he included loving sketches of quintessentially English subjects, a heartfelt essay on Westminster Abbey, a sentimental description of a traditional English Christmas, a tribute to Shakespeare's Stratford-on-Avon. These pieces showed that an American could appreciate old-world culture with the best of them, but cleverly woven in between these English sketches were tales drawn from the folklore and landscapes of his own country. He was, in effect, smuggling American stories into the literary mainstream under the cover of a book that seemed to be about England. He was saying to his readers, "If you enjoy my thoughts on your ancient abbeys, perhaps you will also enjoy this strange little tale from our mysterious Catskill Mountains, or this ghost story from one of our sleepy Dutch hamlets." It was a masterful strategy. The sketchbook was a cultural peace treaty, a project designed to soothe English cultural snobbery while simultaneously elevating American subject matter. It was Irving's audacious attempt to prove that American stories were worthy of the same elegant prose and romantic sensibility as European ones. And so, from his sister's house in Birmingham, Irving began to write, sending his sketches back to America in installments to be published. He was a man writing about home from 1,000 miles away, a man crafting ghost stories while surrounded by the clamor of industry. And among the first of these American sketches were two tales that would become the foundational pillars of his fame and of American literature itself: the story of a man who sleeps for 20 years, and the story of a schoolmaster who meets a headless ghost. Before Washington Irving put pen to paper, before the name Ichabod Crane was ever conceived, the place itself existed. It was a real corner of the world, with its own history, its own rhythms, and its own ghosts. To truly understand the legend of Sleepy Hollow, we must first journey to the real landscape that captured Irving's imagination, the quiet, dreamy shores of the Hudson River in Westchester County, New York. This was, and still is, a place defined by the river. The mighty Hudson, at this point, widens into a great shimmering expanse of water known as the Tappan Zee. It is less a river here and more an inland sea. its broad surface reflecting the changing moods of the sky. For centuries this waterway was the main artery of commerce, travel, and life for the communities nestled along its banks. One of these communities was the old Dutch village of Tarry Town. Irving himself gives us its folk etymology, claiming the name was given by the local housewives from the inveterate propensity of their husbands to linger about the village tavern on market days. Whether true or not, the name perfectly captures the town's character, a place to linger, to tarry, a place outside the frantic pace of the nearby metropolis of New York City. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, this was a world steeped in its Dutch heritage. Though politically English and then American, the culture of the original settlers clung to the region like morning mist. You could see it in the architecture of the old farmhouses with their steep sloping roofs. You could hear it in the surnames of the prominent families, the Van Tassels, the Van Rippers, the Van Warts, and you could feel it in the air. This was a place that felt older than the young nation to which it belonged. It was a pocket of the past, preserved, but nested within this already quiet region was a place even more secluded, more mysterious, a small sheltered valley or hollow that ran into the hills from the river. This was Sleepy Hollow. Irving describes it not just as a place, but as a state of being. He writes, "A drowsy, dreamy influence seems to hang over the land, and to pervade the very atmosphere." He paints a picture of a place where time slows down, where the inhabitants move at a languid pace, and where the lines between the waking world and the world of dreams seem to blur. The people here, he tells us, are given to all kinds of marvelous beliefs. They are prone to seeing strange sights, hearing mysterious music, and telling ghostly tales. Sleepy Hollow is not just a location, it is an enchantment. This was the genius of Irving's setting. He took a real place, with its tangible history of Dutch settlement and its specific geography, and layered it with a palpable sense of the supernatural. The spell over the hollow is his invention, but it's an invention that feels true to the sleepy, secluded nature of the valley. He establishes from the very first paragraphs that this is a land where the unbelievable is not only possible, but expected. It is the perfect stage for a ghost story, a place where a rational mind might be forgiven for losing its way in the twilight shadows. The heart of this enchanted land was the old Dutch church and its burying ground. This was a real place, and it remains there to this day. A simple fieldstone church built in the late 1600s, it stood as the spiritual and historical anchor of the community. Its graveyard, with its weathered lichen-covered headstones bearing the old Dutch names, was a library of the town's history. It was here, among the graves of the real families who had lived and died in the hollow, that Irving would choose to tether his fictional legend, giving his ghost a home and a history that felt ancient and profoundly real. The sleepy, drowsy atmosphere that Washington Irving described was a peaceful facade painted over a violent and traumatic past. The very ground of Westchester County was haunted, not just by specters, but by the very real ghosts of the American Revolution. During the war, this region was not a safe haven. It was a brutal no-man's land, a place of terror known simply as the neutral ground. The neutral ground was a roughly 30-mile-wide swath of territory caught between the main British forces occupying New York City to the south and the Continental Army holding the Highlands to the north. It was neutral in name only. In reality, it was a lawless, war-torn landscape tormented by both sides and abandoned by formal law. This was a land of ambush and reprisal, of sudden savage violence. It was plagued by roving gangs of marauders who preyed upon the local farmsteads. From the south came the cowboys, loyalist gangs who rustled cattle and stole goods to sell to the British Army. From the north came the skinners, patriot-affiliated bandits who would skin a farmer of all his possessions, often under the guise of patriotic duty. For the families living here, loyalty was a dangerous declaration. Neighbors turned on neighbors, and survival often meant keeping your head down and your allegiances secret. This was a place of deep paranoia, where a knock on the door in the middle of the night could mean ruin or death. Washington Irving grew up with these stories. He heard them from the old veterans and farmers who had lived through it. His own story is filled with these echoes of war. The boisterous Brombones, he tells us, was foremost at all races and cockfights, and with the ascendancy which bodily strength acquires in rustic life, was the umpire in all disputes. This is a perfect description of a man whose character was forged in a lawless time where physical power was the ultimate authority. But the most significant specter to emerge from this conflict was that of the Hessian soldier. The Hessians were German mercenaries, hired by the British to fight the American colonists. They were renowned for their discipline and ferocity, and they were deeply feared by the local population. Dressed in towering brass-fronted caps and dark uniforms, they seemed to the American farmers like monstrous, almost inhuman figures from some dark European fairy tale. Their presence on the neutral ground was a source of constant terror, and like soldiers in any war, many of them died here, far from their homes, buried in unmarked graves. It is from this historical reality that Irving plucks the seed of his legend. He writes that the Headless Horseman, the dominant spirit of the region, is the ghost of a Hessian trooper whose head had been carried away by a cannonball in some nameless battle during the Revolutionary War. This is a masterstroke of storytelling. Irving takes the real historical fear of the Hessian soldier and transforms it into a supernatural one. He gives a local ghost a specific, plausible origin story rooted in the shared trauma of the community. The horseman is not just a random ghoul. He is a casualty of the war that defined the nation, a restless European spirit forever haunting the American landscape. He is a ghost with a history, which makes him all the more believable and all the more terrifying. The blood shed on the neutral ground had consecrated the soil, making it the perfect place for a headless ghost to ride. Into this drowsy, haunted, and enchanted land, a land steeped in Dutch custom and revolutionary ghosts, there comes a stranger. He is the catalyst, the outsider, who will disturb the sleepy equilibrium of the hollow. He is to be the hero of our tale, though, as we shall see, he is a most unusual kind of hero. His name is Ichabod Crane. Washington Irving introduces him not with a description of his noble character, but with a wonderfully precise and comical inventory of his physical appearance. And here, let us turn to Irving's own words. The cognomen of Crane was not inapplicable to his person. He was tall, but exceedingly lank, with narrow shoulders, long arms and legs, hands that dangled a mile out of his sleeves, feet that might have served for shovels, and his whole frame most loosely hung together. His head was small and flat at top, with huge ears, large green glassy eyes, and a long snipe nose, so that it looked like a weathercock perched upon his spindle neck to tell which way the wind blew. To see him striding along the profile of a hill on a windy day, with his clothes bagging and fluttering about him, one might have mistaken him for the genius of famine descending upon the earth, or some scarecrow eloped from a cornfield. This is not the description of a romantic hero. It is a caricature. Ichabod is comical, gangling, and slightly grotesque. He is named, a footnote tells us, after a real soldier of that name, but his physical form is pure invention, designed for maximum awkwardness. He is the classic fish out of water, a Connecticut Yankee, a New Englander, whose sharp, angular features are a stark contrast to the stout, comfortable forms of the Dutch farmers. His profession is that of a schoolmaster. In this community, this is not a position of great wealth or status. It is a humble role, and Ichabod supplements his meager income by boarding and lodging at the houses of the farmers whose children he instructed. This system of boarding round means he is a wanderer, a man with no fixed home, carrying his few worldly possessions tied up in a cotton handkerchief. But Irving makes it clear that Ichabod is more than just a simple teacher. He has another, more powerful role in the community. He was, moreover, esteemed by the women as a man of great erudition, for he had read several books quite through, and was a perfect master of Cotton Mather's History of New England Witchcraft, in which, by the way, he most firmly and potently believed. Here Irving brilliantly links his fictional schoolmaster to the very real history we explored earlier. Ichabod is a direct intellectual descendant of the New England Puritans, the world of the Salem witch trials. He is not just a teacher, he is a carrier of superstition. While the Dutch farmers have their vague, dreamy ghost stories, Ichabod brings with him the dark, intellectual, and terrifyingly specific demonology of Cotton Mather. He becomes the community's expert in the supernatural, spending the long winter evenings by the fire with the old Dutch wives, trading ghost stories. He would delight them equally by his anecdotes of witchcraft and of the portentous sights and sounds in the air which prevailed in the earlier times of Connecticut, and would frighten them woefully with speculations upon comets and shooting stars, and with the alarming fact that the world did absolutely turn round, and that they were half the time topsy-turvy. But the narrative that was most acceptable to him was that of the favorite specter of Sleepy Hollow, the Headless Horseman. This is the great irony of Ichabod Crane. By day he is a man of learning, teaching reason and knowledge to the children of the Hollow. By night he is a connoisseur of terror, a man who indulges his appetite for the marvelous. He loves to frighten others with his tales, but he is also his own best audience. After an evening spent swapping ghost stories, his lonely walk home becomes a journey of pure terror. How often did his heart sink within him as he heard the sighing of the blast through the trees of a snowy night! How often was he appalled by some shrub covered with snow, which like a sheeted spectre beset his very path! How often did he shrink with curdling awe at the sound of his own steps on the frosty crust beneath his feet, and dread to look over his shoulder, lest he should behold some uncouth being tramping close behind him! And how often was he thrown into complete dismay by some rushing blast, howling among the trees, in the idea that it was the galloping Hessian of the Hollow! Irving has created the perfect protagonist for a ghost story. Ichabod Crane is not a brave hero who will fight the monster. He is a man whose own overactive, superstitious imagination is his worst enemy. He is primed for terror. He is in essence a man who is destined to be haunted, if not by a real ghost, then by the phantoms of his own mind. And it is this impressionable, greedy, and deeply fearful man who is about to set his sights on the greatest prize in all of Sleepy Hollow. In this quiet, drowsy valley, where the greatest ambitions seem to be a good harvest and a peaceful life, there is one man who stands apart. He is not a man of intellect or ambition, but of pure, untamed physical energy. He is the alpha male of Sleepy Hollow, the roaring, roistering blade who dominates the rustic social scene. He is Ichabod Crane's great rival, and his name is Abraham Van Brunt, though he is universally known by a more formidable moniker, Brom Bones. Irving introduces him as a force of nature, a local legend whose reputation for strength and daring is known throughout the countryside. He is everything Ichabod is not. He was broad-shouldered and double-jointed, with short curly black hair, and a bluff but not unpleasant countenance, having a mingled air of fun and arrogance. From his Herculean frame and great powers of limb, he had received the nickname of Brom Bones, by which he was universally known. He was famed for great knowledge and skill in horsemanship. He was always ready for either a fight or a frolic, but had more mischief than ill will in his composition, and with all his overbearing roughness there was a strong dash of waggish good humor at bottom. Brom Bones is the quintessential American folk hero. He is Paul Bunyan or Davy Crockett in miniature. He is a man of the earth, not of the book. While Ichabod represents the mind with all its learning and its fears, Brom represents the body, powerful, confident, and utterly at home in its environment. He is the insider to Ichabod's outsider. The other young men of the hollow look up to him as their leader, forming a gang of rough riders who follow him on his adventures, and for some time the greatest prize in the hollow, the beautiful Katrina Van Tassel, had been his undisputed territory. He had for some time singled out the blooming Katrina for the object of his uncouth gallantries, and though his amorous toyings were something like the gentle caresses and endearments of a bear, yet it was whispered that she did not altogether discourage his hopes. When the lanky, awkward schoolmaster Ichabod Crane begins to court Katrina, Brom Bones does not see him as a serious rival, but as an absurd joke. A physical confrontation would be beneath him. To challenge Ichabod to a fist fight would be like a bear fighting a scarecrow. So Brom decides to wage a different kind of war, a campaign of public humiliation and psychological torment perfectly suited to his trickster nature. He will turn the full force of his waggish good humor upon the unfortunate schoolmaster. The rivalry is not a fair fight. It is a contest between two entirely different worlds. Brom's attacks are practical, physical, and designed to expose Ichabod's foolishness to the entire community. Brom, who had a degree of rough chivalry in his nature, would fain have carried matters to open warfare, but Ichabod was too conscious of the superior might of his adversary to enter the lists against him. Brom, therefore, had to resort to all kinds of mischievous pranks and practical jokes. Innumerable were the vexations he devised. He smoked out his singing school by stopping up the chimney, broke into the schoolhouse at night, and turned everything topsy-turvy, so that the poor schoolmaster began to think all the witches in the country held their meetings there. But what was still more annoying, Brom took all opportunities of turning him into ridicule in presence of his mistress, and had a scoundrel dog, whom he taught to whine in the most ludicrous manner, and introduced as a rival of Ichabod's to instruct her in psalmody. This is a classic battle of the folk hero versus the educated fool, the brawn versus the brain, but in this case brawn has all the advantages. Brom's pranks are a form of community theater, performances that reinforce his own status as the dominant male while painting Ichabod as a superstitious and cowardly outsider. Ichabod, however, is undeterred. He presses on with his courtship, too blinded by his visions of wealth and food to recognize the danger he is in. He believes he is in a simple contest for a lady's hand, but he is actually in a war for his own survival in the hollow. Brom Bones, the master of this rustic world, has declared Ichabod his enemy, and as the autumn nights grow longer, this campaign of practical jokes is about to escalate, culminating in one final, terrifying prank on a dark and haunted road. The rivalry between Ichabod and Brom, this silent war of pranks and courtship, simmered through the late summer and into the fall. The entire community was watching, waiting to see who would win the hand of the blooming Katrina. The stage for the final confrontation would be one of the great social events of the season, a quilting frolic or autumn party held at the magnificent farmhouse of Baltus Van Tassel himself. One fine autumnal afternoon, a messenger on horseback clatters up to Ichabod's schoolhouse. He bears an invitation from the old farmer for Ichabod to attend the evening's festivities. For the schoolmaster, this is a sign. His courtship is succeeding. He is being welcomed into the very heart of the Van Tassel dynasty. He dismisses his students an hour early, his mind already racing with anticipation. The rest of the afternoon is spent in a flurry of preparation, a comical attempt to make his scarecrow-like frame presentable for the grand affair. He spent at least an extra half-hour at his toilet, brushing and furbishing up his best, and indeed only suit of rusty black, and arranging his locks by a bit of broken looking-glass that hung up in the schoolhouse, that he might make his appearance before his mistress in the true style of a cavalier. He borrowed a horse from the farmer with whom he was domiciliated, a choleric old Dutchman of the name of Hans van Ripper, and, thus gallantly mounted, issued forth like a knight-errant in quest of adventures. The horse he borrows is as comically ill-suited as its rider. It is not a noble steed, but a broken-down plough-horse named Gunpowder. He is old, gaunt, and fiery-tempered, a mirror image of Ichabod himself. The image of the lanky schoolmaster, his legs nearly touching the ground, perched atop this dilapidated horse, is pure comedy. Ichabod sees himself as a knightly hero, but to the rest of the world he is a ridiculous spectacle. As he rides through the crisp autumn air, the landscape itself seems to celebrate the season. Irving paints a glorious picture of the Hudson Valley in its fall splendor, the brilliant colors of the trees, the rich hues of the setting sun, the sense of abundance and contentment in the air. He arrives at the Van Tassel homestead to find a scene of dazzling prosperity. The barns are overflowing, the fields are rich, and the house itself is a beacon of light and merriment. The lights of the mansion streamed glistening through the trees, and as he drew near he heard the sound of the music and dancing. Fain would I pause to dwell upon the world of charms that burst upon the enraptured gaze of my hero as he entered the state parlor of Van Tassel's mansion. Not those of the bevy of buxom lasses with their luxurious display of red and white, but the ample charms of a genuine Dutch country tea-table in the sumptuous time of autumn. And here Irving reminds us once again of Ichabod's true motivation. He launches into another mouth-watering catalogue of food, the honey cakes, the crullers, the shortcakes, and the pies. Ichabod's eyes are not on Katrina's beauty, but on the feast that surrounds her. He is a man intoxicated by the sheer edible wealth of the Van Tassel farm. The party is in full swing. The music is lively, the dancing is energetic, and the room is filled with the hearty, laughing figures of the Dutch farmers and their families. And there, in the center of it all, is the lord of this rustic world, Brom Bones. He arrives in his trademark style, on his powerful black steed, Daredevil, a horse as famous for its spirit as its master. The tension between the two rivals is palpable, but for now it is held in check by the spirit of the frolic. Ichabod, full of food and confidence, joins the dance with Katrina, his awkward, loose-limbed movements a stark contrast to the easy grace of the other dancers. He believes he is winning. He feels the prize is within his grasp. But as the dancing gives way to the telling of tales, the mood of the evening is about to take a dark and fateful turn. The party is ending, and the time for ghost stories has arrived. As the joyful energy of the dance subsided, the guests at the Van Tassel party gathered in smaller groups, their faces illuminated by the warm glow of the fire. The chill of the autumn night crept closer, and with it the mood shifted from frolic to folklore. This was the moment for the telling of tales, a cherished tradition in this community, where the supernatural felt ever present. The conversation naturally drifted to the subject of the Revolutionary War, the defining event for the older generation. They spun yarns of their youthful exploits on the neutral ground, of skirmishes and ambushes, of hairbreadth escapes from cowboys and skinners. These were not just war stories, they were the foundation of the local mythology, and from these tales of war it was a short, easy step to tales of ghosts. The line between a historical memory and a haunting was thin and Sleepy Hollow. The neighborhood is rich in legendary treasures of the kind. Local tales and superstitions thrive best in these sheltered, long-settled retreats. The revenue of the neighborhood and the legends furnished by the Indian wars had been exhausted. The direful churchyard, the bloody stream where the unfortunate Major Andre was captured, had all been heard over and over again. But all these were nothing to the tales of ghosts and goblins that succeeded. Irving creates a hierarchy of fear. The war stories are thrilling, but the ghost stories are what truly captivate the imagination. He lists the local haunts, the wailing woman in white, who perishes in the winter snow, the ghostly ship that sails the Hudson. But he makes it clear that one specter reigns supreme. All of these other local legends pale in comparison to the master spirit of the region. The conversation inevitably turns to the Headless Horseman. One after another, the farmers and their wives share their own supposed encounters with the galloping Hessian. One man tells of being overtaken by the horseman on the road and being hurled into the brook. Another claims to have been forced to ride behind him, only to be thrown off at the bridge by the church. And then Brom Bones, the master of this rustic world, decides to tell his own story. He is not a man given to superstition, but he is a master of performance. In a loud, confident voice, he claims that he too had a run-in with the Headless Horseman just the other night. He affirmed that, on returning one night from the neighboring village of Sing Sing, he had been overtaken by this midnight trooper, that he had offered to race with him for a bowl of punch, and should have won it too, for Daredevil beat the goblin horse All Hollow. But just as they came to the church bridge, the Hessian bolted and vanished in a flash of fire. This is a brilliant piece of storytelling by Brom. His tale is completely different from the others. He is not a victim of the horseman, he is a challenger. He races the ghost and wins. He asserts his dominance even over the supernatural world, reinforcing his status as the fearless hero of the Hollow. His story is a performance of masculine bravado, likely designed for two audiences, to impress Katrina and to subtly mock the superstitious fears of his rival Ichabod Crane. And Ichabod, the connoisseur of the marvelous, has been drinking it all in. He sits in a corner, his jaw dropped, his large green eyes fixed on the storytellers, while the others might share these tales with a wink and a nod, For Ichabod, they are terrifyingly real. He counters their local legends with his own dire tales from Cotton Mather's books of grim omens, demonic possessions, and the dreadful power of witchcraft in New England. He has spent the entire evening absorbing these frightening narratives. His overactive, superstitious imagination, already primed for terror, is now fully saturated with images of ghosts, goblins, and, above all, the specter of a headless rider who haunts the very roads he must now travel. The party begins to break up. The farmers load their families into their wagons and set off for home. The hour is late, the very witching time of night, and Ichabod Crane, full of food, full of hope for Katrina's hand, and full of terror, lingers behind, preparing for the most important and most fateful ride of his life. The last of the wagons had rumbled away from the Van Tassel farm, their songs and laughter fading into the dark, silent night. Ichabod Crane lingered behind. He saw this as his moment of triumph, the perfect opportunity to have a tete-a-tete with the heiress, confident that he could now secure her hand, and, with it, her fortune. What passed between Ichabod and Katrina in that brief private meeting, Irving does not say. He leaves it to our imagination, but the result is painfully clear. Something, however, I fear me, must have gone wrong, for he certainly sallied forth, after no very long interval, with the air of one who had been sacking a hen-roost rather than conquering a heart. Oh, these women! These women! Could that girl have been playing off any of her coquettish tricks? Was her encouragement of the poor pedagogue all a mere sham to secure her conquest of his rival? Heaven only knows, not I. He has been rejected. His grand, food-laden dreams have been shattered in an instant. The conquering hero now feels like a common thief. Crestfallen, heavy-hearted, and utterly dejected, he trudges to the barn to find his sorry steed Gunpowder. The night is dark and silent. The moon is low in the sky, often obscured by clouds. The world that had seemed so bright and full of promise just hours before now appears menacing and grim. Every sound, every shadow is magnified by his melancholy and his already overstimulated imagination. He is a man whose spirit is at its lowest ebb, making him exquisitely vulnerable to the terrors of the night. He sets off on his lonely journey, the silence of the hollow pressing in on him. Soon he reaches a point in the road that is infamous in the local lore. He had not gone far when he entered a hollow part of the road, which was shaded by trees for about a quarter of a mile. It was at this very place that the unfortunate Major Andre was taken, and under the covert of those chestnuts and vines were the sturdy yeomen concealed who surprised him. This has ever since been considered a haunted stream, and fearful are the feelings of the schoolboy who has to pass it alone after dark. This is the first great landmark of fear on his journey. The ghost of the British spy Major Andre is said to haunt this spot. As Ichabod approaches, his heart begins to pound. He hears a groan and looks up to see something white hanging in the branches of a massive tulip tree. His imagination screams ghost, but it is only a spot where the moonlight has broken through the leaves. His fear subsides, but his nerves are now frayed. He urges Gunpowder on, but the old horse seems to share his master's sense of dread, shying at every shadow. Ichabod, in an attempt to comfort himself, begins to whistle a psalm tune, but his comfort is short-lived. He hears a rustling in the bushes beside the road. He stops. The rustling stops. He continues. The sound follows him. He gave Gunpowder a kick in the ribs that sent him plunging to the opposite side of the road. He now quickened his pace in hopes of leaving this unseen companion behind. The strange beast, however, quickened his pace to an equal degree. It was no longer a rustling in the brush, but a heavy tramp on the blind side of him. "Who's there?" he demanded, in a faltering voice. There is no reply. He looks over his shoulder, but sees nothing but the deep, impenetrable darkness. The sound of heavy, rhythmic footsteps continues alongside him. He is no longer alone on this dark road. Something large, powerful, and unseen is now pacing him in the shadows. The midnight ride has begun in earnest, and the greatest terror is still to come. Terror had now fully seized Ichabod Crane. The unseen thing tramping alongside him in the darkness was more frightening than any ghost he could imagine. He kicked Gunpowder into a desperate shambling canter, hoping to outrun his pursuer. But the shadowy figure matched his pace, its heavy footfalls a constant, terrifying rhythm in the night. He reached a point where the road climbed a small hill, silhouetting him and his horse against the night sky. This made him a clear target, but it also gave him a chance to see his mysterious companion. He cast a fearful glance behind him, and there it was, on the very summit of a hill. A figure was discernible, cutting a gigantic bulk against the sky, and muffled in a cloak. Ichabod's terror rose to desperation. He rained a shower of kicks and blows upon Gunpowder, hoping by a sudden movement to give his companion the slip. But the spectre started full jump with him. Away then they dashed, through thick and thin, stones flying and sparks flashing at every bound. Ichabod's flimsy garments fluttered in the air as he stretched his long, lank body away over his horse's head in the eagerness of his flight. The chase is on. For a moment Ichabod thinks he might have a chance, but as he glances back again to gauge his pursuer's speed, he sees the detail that turns his blood to ice. He was horror-struck on perceiving that the ghost was headless, but his horror was still more increased on observing that the head, which should have rested on his shoulders, was carried before him on the pommel of his saddle. His terror rose to desperation. He rained a shower of kicks and blows upon Gunpowder, for he saw the awful object preparing to hurl the head at him. Ichabod endeavored to dodge the horrible missile, but too late. Wait a minute. That's not quite right. That's the version of the story many of us know, immortalized by the 1949 Disney animation, a terrifying figure hurling a flaming pumpkin. But that is not what Washington Irving wrote. Irving's reveal is far more subtle, more psychologically terrifying, and much, much worse for poor Ichabod. Let's go back and read it as it was truly written. Just then he saw the goblin rising in his stirrups, and in the very act of hurling his head at him, Ichabod shut his eyes and sank low into the saddle. He was aroused by the astounding crash of the missile just as it struck his own head. He was tumbled headlong into the dust, and Gunpowder, the black steed, and the goblin rider passed by like a whirlwind. Do you see the difference? The missile is never described as a pumpkin. To Ichabod, in his moment of supreme terror, the object hurled at him is the goblin's head. He is not struck by a piece of fruit. He is struck by a decapitated, flying skull. The distinction is crucial. It is the culmination of every ghost story he has ever heard, the physical manifestation of his deepest, most primal fear. The impact sends him tumbling from his horse into the dirt. The last thing he sees is the black steed and its goblin rider passing by like a storm. Then darkness. The chase is over. The schoolmaster lies senseless on the road. The Headless Horseman has claimed his victory at the very bridge that was supposed to be the place of safety. The legend of Sleepy Hollow has just been fulfilled in the most violent and terrifying way imaginable. The next morning, the sun rose on a perfectly normal, peaceful day in Sleepy Hollow. The birds were singing, the farmers were heading to their fields, and the world seemed to have forgotten the terrors of the night. But something was amiss. First, old Hans Van Ripper discovered that his horse, Gunpowder, had returned home, but without his rider. The saddle had been trampled, and was covered in mud. The old farmer's fury at the loss of his saddle was soon replaced by a genuine concern for the missing schoolmaster. Later in the morning an inquiry was made. A search party began to trace Ichabod's path from the previous night. The tracks of horses' hoofs, deeply dented in the road, and evidently at furious speed, were traced to the bridge. On the bank of the brook, close to the bridge, was found the hat of the unfortunate Ichabod, and close beside it a shattered pumpkin. And there it is, the first and only time the word pumpkin appears in the entire narrative. A shattered pumpkin, lying next to Ichabod's hat at the scene of the attack. What are we to make of this? Was the goblin's head that Ichabod saw in his terror merely a piece of fruit, or is this just a strange coincidence? Irving presents the clue, but offers no immediate explanation. The search for the schoolmaster continues. They search the brook, they search the woods, but his body is nowhere to be found. The brook was searched, but the body of the schoolmaster was not to be discovered. Hans van Ripper, as executor of his estate, examined the bundle which contained all his worldly effects. They consisted of 2 shirts and a half, 2 stocks for the neck, a pair or 2 of worsted stockings, an old pair of corduroy small-clothes, a rusty razor, a book of psalm tunes full of dog's ears, and a broken pitch-pipe. This is the sad, meager inventory of a life. All of Ichabod's grand ambitions have been reduced to a small, pathetic bundle of worn-out clothes. He has vanished from the hollow as completely as if he had been spirited away by the very goblin he feared. The news of his disappearance spreads through the community, and the theories begin to fly. The old Dutch wives, firm in their superstitious beliefs, are certain of the cause. They conclude without a doubt that Ichabod Crane was carried off by the galloping Hessian. The story of his midnight ride becomes the crowning jewel of the local folklore, another terrifying tale to be told on long winter nights. But Irving is not finished. He has presented us with a perfect ghost story, but he is about to give us another, more rational possibility, a final piece of the puzzle that allows the reader to choose their own truth. And to do that, he introduces one final bit of news from the wider world. Washington Irving presented the legend of Sleepy Hollow as a homespun American tale, a story he claimed to have found among the papers of the late Diedrich Knickerbocker. But this was part of the fiction. The truth is, the ghost of the Headless Horseman did not first rise from the battlefields of the American Revolution. He galloped out of the deep, dark forests of German folklore. While living in Europe, Irving became fascinated with the burgeoning Romantic movement in Germany. He was an avid reader of German folk tales, which were being collected and popularized at the time. In 1817, just before he began writing the sketchbook, he spent time in Dresden, soaking in the culture and literature. It was here that he almost certainly encountered a collection of stories by an author named Johann Karl August Musaeus, titled Volksmärchen der Deutschen, or Folk Tales of the Germans. Hidden within this collection was a series of tales about a trickster mountain spirit named Rubezahl, and in one of these tales, the legend of Rubezahl, we find a scene that is so remarkably similar to Ichabod's midnight ride that it cannot be a coincidence. It is the hidden blueprint for the legend of Sleepy Hollow. In the German tale, a cocky young traveler is riding through the mountains at night. He scoffs at the local legends of the mountain spirit. Suddenly, a mysterious, shadowy figure on horseback begins to follow him. The traveler tries to outrun it, but the figure keeps pace. The story continues, and let's listen to a translation of the key moment. The traveler cast a stealthy glance at his companion, and behold, a sight of horror. The horseman was headless. He had no head on his shoulders, but carried it on the pommel of his saddle, where it bobbed up and down with the motion of the horse. The traveller's hair stood on end. He spurred his horse to its utmost speed, but the phantom was always at his side. As they came to a crossroads, the specter suddenly threw its head at the traveller, striking him from his horse. The next morning he was found lying senseless in the road. The parallels are stunning and undeniable. The headless figure on horseback, the chase carrying the head on the saddle, the climactic hurl of the head that unseats the rider, it's all there. Washington Irving did not invent the Headless Horseman, he imported him. But to say he simply copied the story is to do him a grave disservice. Irving's genius was not in the invention, but in the masterful act of transplantation. He took this raw Gothic German specter and gave it a new home and a new history. He stripped the ghost of its generic phantom identity and clothed it in the specific uniform of a Hessian trooper, rooting it in the real trauma of the American Revolution. He moved the chase from an anonymous mountain pass to the very specific haunted roads of the Hudson Valley, complete with local landmarks like the Major Andre tree and the old Dutch church bridge. Most importantly, he replaced the nameless German traveler with the unforgettable, deeply realized character of Ichabod Crane. The German tale is just a spooky anecdote. Irving's story is a rich psychological study, a social satire, and a brilliant character comedy that culminates in a ghost story. He took a German ghost and made it profoundly, unforgettably American. This act of literary alchemy, of borrowing from the old world to create a new mythology for his own young country, was the very essence of the sketchbook project. The legend of Sleepy Hollow was never meant to stand alone. It was published as one of 34 pieces in the sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon, Gent. To fully appreciate its purpose, we must see it not as a solitary ghost story, but as one half of a brilliant diptych, a companion piece to the other American tale that made the collection famous, Rip Van Winkle. Together, these two stories represent Washington Irving's deliberate and masterful attempt to do for America what Sir Walter Scott was doing for Scotland, to create a national mythology. He wanted to give his young, insecure nation a sense of history, a folklore, and a romantic past that could stand alongside the ancient legends of Europe. He did this by taking European story structures and dressing them in American clothes. Consider the two tales side by side. Both are set in the past, in the sleepy pre-industrial Dutch communities along the Hudson River. Both draw heavily on German folklore for their central supernatural conceits. We've seen how Sleepy Hollow borrowed from the legend of Rubezahl. Rip Van Winkle was similarly inspired by a German folk tale of a goatherd named Peter Klaus, who wanders into the mountains, drinks a magical potion offered by mysterious old men, and falls asleep for 20 years. Both stories explore the theme of change and the passage of time. Rip Van Winkle falls asleep in a British colony and awakens in the United States of America. He literally sleeps through the Revolution, becoming a living relic, a man out of time. His story is a gentle, comic exploration of America's political transformation. The legend of Sleepy Hollow, set just after the Revolution, explores a different kind of change, the social and cultural conflict between the old world and the new. It pits the rustic, agrarian Dutch world of Brombones against the ambitious, intellectual, and greedy Yankee world of Ichabod Crane. It is a story about the changing character of America itself, But the most brilliant connection between the two stories is how they use the supernatural. In both tales, the supernatural event is presented with a perfect, tantalizing ambiguity. Did Rip Van Winkle really meet the ghosts of Henry Hudson's crew in the mountains? Or did he just wander off on a drunken stupor for 20 years? Irving gives us just enough room for doubt. The same is true for Sleepy Hollow. Did Ichabod Crane really get carried off by a demonic Hessian ghost? Or was he simply the victim of a clever and terrifying prank by his rival Brom Bones, who used the local legend to frighten the superstitious schoolmaster out of town for good? This ambiguity is the secret to their enduring power. By refusing to give a definitive answer, Irving allows both possibilities to exist at once. The rational explanation satisfies the skeptical reader, while the supernatural explanation allows the legend to live on as a true ghost story. He creates a space where folklore and history can coexist. Viewed together, Rip Van Winkle and the Legend of Sleepy Hollow are the foundational myths of the new American literary landscape. One is a tale of time, the other a tale of place. One is about history, the other about folklore. They were Irving's gift to his country, a pair of perfectly crafted legends that gave America a past it could dream about, a past filled with charming Dutch farmers, mysterious mountains, and unforgettable ghosts. When Washington Irving began sending the installments of the sketchbook across the Atlantic from his humble lodgings in England, he had no idea what to expect. He was writing for his life, hoping only to earn enough to keep his creditors at bay. He could not have possibly imagined that he was about to unleash a literary phenomenon that would stun the world and redefine his country's place on the cultural map. The success was not gradual, it was immediate and explosive. In America, the reaction was pure, unadulterated pride. The young nation, so long condescended to by its former colonial master, finally had a literary champion. Here was an American writer whose prose was not just good, it was exquisite. It was elegant, witty, and deeply moving. Critics and the public alike devoured the installments. They celebrated the charming sketches of England, but they fell in love with Rip Van Winkle and the Headless Horseman. These weren't just stories, they were declarations of cultural independence. America finally had its own folklore, its own ghosts, its own mythology, crafted by one of its own sons. But the true test was England. The London literary scene was notoriously skeptical of American authors. Irving, fearing piracy and bad reviews, arranged for his book to be published in London by the influential publisher John Murray. He was aided by the enthusiastic support of the most famous author in the world at that time, Sir Walter Scott, who recognized Irving's immense talent and championed his work. The English critics were captivated. They praised the graceful, almost perfect prose. They were charmed by Geoffrey Crayon's affectionate and romanticized portraits of their own country, and they were utterly fascinated by the strange, exotic tales from America. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle were unlike anything they had read before. They were fresh, imaginative, and tinged with the thrilling mystery of a new world. The sketchbook became a runaway bestseller on both continents. For Washington Irving, the transformation was absolute. He went from being a bankrupt, forgotten exile to being the most famous American author in the world. The man who had been trampled in the dust was now toasted in the finest literary salons of London and Paris. He had achieved what no American had done before. He had conquered the old world with stories of the new. Financially, he was secure for the first time in his life. his success allowing him to live comfortably and travel widely, cementing his persona as the gentleman author Geoffrey Crayon. He had not just created a book, he had created a career and an identity. He was no longer a failed businessman, he was Washington Irving, the father of American literature, the cultural ambassador who had built a bridge of words across the Atlantic. The success of the sketchbook, powered by its two immortal American tales, ensured that the legend of the Headless Horseman would not remain a quaint local story. It was now a certified classic of world literature, its future guaranteed. The specter was no longer confined to the hollow, it was now free to gallop across the globe and into the imaginations of generations yet to come. When Washington Irving began sending the installments of the sketchbook across the Atlantic from his humble lodgings in England, he had no idea what to expect. He was writing for his life, hoping only to earn enough to keep his creditors at bay. He could not have possibly imagined that he was about to unleash a literary phenomenon that would stun the world and redefine his country's place on the cultural map. The success was not gradual, it was immediate and explosive. In America, the reaction was pure, unadulterated pride. The young nation, so long condescended to by its former colonial master, finally had a literary champion. Here was an American writer whose prose was not just good, it was exquisite. It was elegant, witty, and deeply moving. Critics and the public alike devoured the installments. They celebrated the charming sketches of England, but they fell in love with Rip Van Winkle and the Headless Horseman. These weren't just stories, they were declarations of cultural independence. America finally had its own folklore, its own ghosts, its own mythology, crafted by one of its own sons, but the true test was England. The London literary scene was notoriously skeptical of American authors. Irving, fearing piracy and bad reviews, arranged for his book to be published in London by the influential publisher John Murray. He was aided by the enthusiastic support of the most famous author in the world at that time, Sir Walter Scott, who recognized Irving's immense talent and championed his work. The English critics were captivated. They praised the graceful, almost perfect prose. They were charmed by Geoffrey Crayon's affectionate and romanticized portraits of their own country, and they were utterly fascinated by the strange, exotic tales from America. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle were unlike anything they had read before. They were fresh, imaginative, and tinged with the thrilling mystery of a new world. The sketchbook became a runaway bestseller on both continents. For Washington Irving, the transformation was absolute. He went from being a bankrupt, forgotten exile to being the most famous American author in the world. The man who had been trampled in the dust was now toasted in the finest literary salons of London and Paris. He had achieved what no American had done before. He had conquered the old world with stories of the new. Financially, he was secure for the first time in his life, his success allowing him to live comfortably and travel widely, cementing his persona as the gentleman author Geoffrey Crayon. He had not just created a book, he had created a career and an identity. He was no longer a failed businessman. He was Washington Irving, the father of American literature, the cultural ambassador who had built a bridge of words across the Atlantic. The success of the sketchbook, powered by its two immortal American tales, ensured that the legend of the Headless Horseman would not remain a quaint local story. It was now a certified classic of world literature, its future guaranteed. The specter was no longer confined to the hollow, it was now free to gallop across the globe and into the imaginations of generations yet to come. Washington Irving had created a perfect literary ghost, a specter forever trapped in the amber of his elegant prose, but a character as powerful as the Headless Horseman cannot be contained on the page. Once released into the world, he took on a life of his own, becoming a canvas onto which future generations would paint their own fears and fantasies. The story of the horseman in popular culture is a story of constant reinvention. For decades, the primary image of Ichabod and the horseman came from book illustrations by artists like Felix O. C. Darley, which captured the lanky awkwardness and shadowy terror of the original text. But in 1949, one studio would redefine the legend for the entire 20th century. Walt Disney's animated feature, The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, became for millions of people the definitive version of the story. Narrated by Bing Crosby, the Disney version sharpened the story's edges for comedic and dramatic effect. Ichabod became more grotesquely cartoonish, his greed more pronounced. Brom Bones was transformed from a rustic bully into a handsome, barrel-chested town hero. But Disney's most influential contribution was to the legend's climax. It was here that the horseman was given his most iconic weapon. As we discussed, Irving's text has the specter hurl what Ichabod perceives to be his own severed head. Disney, in a stroke of visual genius, transformed that missile into a flaming jack-o'-lantern. This single image, the demonic rider with a sword in one hand and a fiery pumpkin in the other, was so powerful, so visually perfect, that it has almost completely replaced Irving's original text in the popular imagination. Disney's horseman was pure, thrilling, family-friendly terror. 50 years later, in 1999, a new visionary would take the legend in a radically different direction. Director Tim Burton, a master of the macabre, was not interested in a faithful adaptation. He wanted to create a full-blown Gothic horror film. His movie, Sleepy Hollow, kept the names and the setting but completely inverted the story's core. Burton's Ichabod Crane, played by Johnny Depp, is not a superstitious schoolmaster. He is a rational scientific constable from New York City, sent to Sleepy Hollow to investigate a series of brutal decapitations. He is a man of reason forced to confront a supernatural world he refuses to believe in. The Headless Horseman is no longer a ghostly legend or a possible prank. He is terrifyingly real, a resurrected Hessian mercenary, played with demonic glee by Christopher Walken, controlled by a human witch and a complex conspiracy of murder and revenge. Burton's film transformed the ambiguous ghost story into a bloody, action-packed murder mystery. The legend proved its versatility again in the 21st century with the 2013 Fox television series Sleepy Hollow. This adaptation threw the original story into a blender with fantasy and modern police procedurals. Here, Ichabod Crane is a resurrected Revolutionary War soldier who finds himself in the present day, partnering with a modern police lieutenant. The Headless Horseman is not just a local ghost, he is one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, a world-ending threat. From a charming ghost story to a Disney classic, from a Gothic horror film to a fantasy TV show, the legend has proven to be endlessly adaptable. Each generation gets the Headless Horseman it deserves, whether he is a spooky specter, a violent monster, or an apocalyptic demon. His ability to be constantly reborn, yet instantly recognizable, is the ultimate testament to the enduring power of Washington Irving's creation. 200 years have passed since Washington Irving, a man in exile, first dreamed up the tale of a terrified schoolmaster and a headless ghost. In that time, empires have fallen, technologies have remade the world, and countless stories have been written and forgotten. And yet the Headless Horseman still rides. The lanky, foolish figure of Ichabod Crane still flees through our collective imagination. Why? Why does this particular story, born from a German folk tale and written in an English industrial town, continue to hold such a powerful grip on the American soul? The answer lies in its perfect, almost magical blend of universal themes. At its core, the legend of Sleepy Hollow is a classic story of the outsider versus the insider. Ichabod Crane is the eternal newcomer, the ambitious stranger who arrives in a tight-knit community and tries to claim its greatest prize. Brombones is the embodiment of the established order, the local hero who defends his territory. It's a conflict we see played out in every small town, every high school, every office. We instinctively understand this dynamic, and we can choose to root for the clever outsider or the powerful insider. It is also a timeless battle between two opposing forces of the human mind, reason versus superstition. Ichabod is a man of learning, a pedagogue, yet his intellect is utterly useless against his own rampant irrational fears. He represents the part of us that knows there are no monsters, but still quickens our pace when walking past a dark cemetery at night. The story validates both sides of our brain. It allows the rationalist to see a clever prank and the romantic to see a real ghost. It celebrates the power of a good story to overwhelm the facts. But perhaps the greatest key to its immortality is Washington Irving's masterstroke, the ambiguous ending. By refusing to solve the mystery, by leaving the shattered pumpkin on the road as the only clue, Irving gives the legend to us. He makes the reader the final detective. Do you believe the rational explanation that Brombones, in a brilliant act of psychological warfare, used his horsemanship and a well-aimed pumpkin to scare his rival out of town for good? It's a satisfying, logical conclusion. Or do you choose to believe the old Dutch wives? Do you believe that in a place as enchanted and haunted as Sleepy Hollow, a place where the air itself is thick with dreams and shadows, a real specter of a long-dead soldier did, in fact, rise from the churchyard to claim another victim? This, too, is a satisfying, shiver-inducing conclusion. Because both answers are possible, the debate never ends. And because the debate never ends, the story is never truly over. It lives in that space between fact and folklore, between a laugh and a scream. The legend of Sleepy Hollow is more than just America's first great ghost story. It is a tale about the power of storytelling itself. It is a perfect myth that feels as though it was not written but discovered. It is a story that assures us that even in a world of logic and reason, there will always be a place for a dark and lonely road, a frantic rider, and a specter in pursuit, a headless horseman galloping forever through the haunted hollow of our imagination.